Hello and welcome to Conversations for Good. I am John Olajide, founder and CEO of Axxess, a Dallas-based company that's a leader in home healthcare technology. My belief in business as a force for good has always been incredibly important to me and something about which I am deeply passionate, as you can tell. In my role as the chair for the Dallas Regional Chamber, one of my priorities was to highlight how business can be a force for good, and that idea remains a priority commitment today for me at all times, really. So Conversations for Good brings together business leaders, community leaders, entrepreneurs who embody what it means to use business as a force for good in the Dallas-Fort Worth region and beyond. We have a guest that's joining us from Washington, D.C. today, as you can see. So today I am pleased to welcome my friend, Bill Dombi. We've had good laughs already before this got started. Bill is the president of the National Association for Home Care and Hospice. We call it NAHC in our industry. So let me tell you a little bit about Bill. Bill is probably the most knowledgeable expert on healthcare law and policy in Washington. He's been involved in virtually all legislative and regulatory efforts affecting home care and hospice since 1975. I don't want to date Bill, so I'll let you do the math on how long that's been. And in his role as president, Bill specializes in legal, legislative, and regulatory advocacy on behalf of patients and providers of home health and hospice care. The National Association for Home Care and Hospice, or NAHC, as I mentioned earlier, is a nonprofit organization representing more than 33,000 home care and hospice organizations in the U.S. The organization advocates for the more than 2 million nurses, therapists, aides, and other caregivers employed by organizations to provide in-home services to more than 12 million Americans every year. So over the years, I've had the privilege of working with them on a variety of capacities, and I am thankful for Bill's efforts to support the care at home industry. And I'm also privileged to be working with them as a member of the NAHC board. Bill, welcome, and thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, John. I very much appreciate the invitation. You know, the two ingredients that you brought up there of passion and doing good is what you've all been about. And it's certainly what we've all been about in the world of home care and hospice services. So really honored to have spend some time with you today.
Thank you, Bill. So let's get right to it. So while we may have some differences, we have an area in common that we both deeply believe in. You and I believe deeply that the future of healthcare is in the home. So how did you get started in home care and hospice, Bill? And tell us, how has the industry evolved since you first joined in? You don't have to tell us how many years, so you're not dated, but just tell us all about that.
Well, it's going to date me because how I got involved takes it back quite a ways. I had the privilege during my undergraduate work at the University of Connecticut to do an internship at the local legal services program, a legal aid type organization. And I was really just enthralled with the law from that. And I planned on taking a year off between college and law school, and I continued to work there after college graduation. And then I went away to law school. And as I was in law school, I got a phone call from the director of the program saying, we'd like you to come back, to be with us in the summer. He didn't use the word work, he used the word be. And what he wanted me to come back because our softball team almost won the city championship that year. And he thought I might have been a factor in all of that. So I said, well, if I'm going to come back to play softball, I really do need a job too. So long story short, my job was to look into Medicare, home health services, nursing facility care, and otherwise for that summer to find out what can we do to help people in doing so. And at that point, in visiting with many home care patients and home health agencies, I said, this is my calling. This is where I want to do my law practice to help get access to care, to keep people out of institutional care settings. So if I was not an adequate softball player, I might not be here today.
Well, we're grateful you're not a good softball player, and you've made quite a career of advocating for care in the home. And that's been a lot more important, especially this year, given COVID. So let's talk about that a little bit and how that connects with the disparities in healthcare and the home care industry overall. So we all know that the COVID pandemic has revealed, exposed really, disparities in access to care. And I'm sure you weren't as surprised about that because you've known about that for a while, Bill, just giving your background. But the home care industry has really leaned in to take center stage this year, especially to care for people outside of institutional settings. So what does COVID-19's impact mean for the home care industry moving forward, Bill, from your vantage point?
Well, this has been a horrible time. I mean, pandemic has been devastating. It's been tragic. It has broken lives permanently. But for home care, it actually provided an opportunity to shine, to demonstrate its breadth, its depth, its value. And when looking at that opportunity, home care embraced it. And when I say home care of all types, home health services with nurses and therapists, home care with personal care services going into your mother, your grandmother, your grandfather's home, as well as hospice services, all parts of care in the home, embraced the opportunity. And they did it with that kind of passion, with that kind of calling of helping people, not with the intention of showing how great they are, but rather how much they can do for others.
Yep.
And in a very short time, we have seen the awareness of care in the home, its appreciation and the value of it recognized by the general public, by the mass media, and also very important by other healthcare sectors that in the past thought home care was, a step down in the continuum. It's only for this kind of population. Instead, home care demonstrated its high touch and its high tech. It demonstrated that its pre-acute services, acute level of care, and post-acute. Yeah. And it also did one other thing. It has demonstrated that it can be a very effective alternative for inpatient hospital care and care in a skilled nursing facility. So it has really demonstrated versatility, creativity, but also persistence and resilience, because in some ways, home care kind of challenges the sacred cows of healthcare. Those institutional brick and mortar, castles that you see all the time all across the country, whether it be hospitals or even nursing homes. But they demonstrated that in a way which was not threatening. Instead, they demonstrated as, we are an effective partner with all of you. So, it's odd for me as a lawyer who spent most of my time finding people, until I could accuse of doing things wrong and suing the government, to really feel all the positive energy that's come out of this and to have such great pride for the accomplishments of home care. And John, I know you've seen all of that yourself firsthand and have been part of it in supporting that ability to do so. So COVID first turned home care inside out like it did in all of healthcare. Yeah. But the rebound, starting with the home care providers, was almost instantaneous. I love my one little anecdote I'll give to you in that regard, okay? At the beginning of the pandemic, the big issue was, where do you get protective equipment for your staff and for the patients as well? Otherwise known as PPE, personal protective equipment. Home care agencies, consistent with what they've done for decades, thought about it and said, well, if I can't get it in my normal supply chain, I'll figure out a way to get it. And they went to tattoo parlors and nail salons that were closed, found the owners and got the stock of masks and gloves that they might have had. They went so far as to take empty 2-liter bottles of soda, cut them in half and turn them into face shields. So, where there's the will, there's the way is definitely one of the many maxims within the litany of efforts coming out of home care. So I think, as tragic as it's been, we've demonstrated home care is the better place to be treated when you have COVID-19. It's also the better place to be treated generally.
You're right, and I agree totally with everything you said, Bill. And it's really basic. When you ask people, what would you rather get, quality healthcare services at home or in an institutionalized setting, the overwhelming response is, I would rather be at home. And I know technology is making that possible now. So I agree with everything you've said, and thanks for commenting on the resourcefulness of the care at home professionals as well. I want you to touch quickly on, you talked about how you have been suing the government and been tussling with them on making sure there's favorable policies for the industry. Can you just comment on how impressed or pleased you've been with just the regulators leaning in and making sure they can eliminate barriers to help care at home professionals see patients that needed the help?
Well, yeah, and we're a nonpartisan organization, or maybe better put bipartisan. We need friends on both sides of the aisle, and we need the friends within the administration too. And I could say over the decades I've been doing this, it doesn't matter whether you're Republican or Democrat, left or right, they have found reason to be a partner with home care. And during the pandemic, they've demonstrated that again. The Medicare program, for example, waived a number of roadblocks to care in the home. During this public health emergency, Medicaid programs did the same, managed care companies did it as well. But to understand how far they've embraced care in the home, it's actually two recent events I want to highlight. One of them was that the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS, announced that they were going to be expanding a program called Hospital at Home.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, think about that, the hospital level of care being brought into the home setting, because they've seen what amazing things have been done during the pandemic. I mean, that's like taking, the Millennium Falcon from Star Wars and hitting it into warp drive and just accelerating home care going forward. And then most recently, just this past week, they came out with a new demonstration program called the Direct Care Contracting Program in a geographic area. And they're allowing those contractors to waive one of what we thought was the most sacrosanct of Medicare eligibility rules for home health benefit, that the patient had to be confined to the home. They had to be homebound. So you're seeing the government embracing home care at the high end of patient acuity, at the opposite end by saying, well, you might be able to leave the home and get care on your own, but we'll still bring it to you because we think there's great value in doing so. So I think when we look up and down, the COVID-19 path from the regulator side of it, they did everything they could to find ways to keep people at home. Keep in mind, if there's no hospital bed, we know where a bed is.
Yep.
In the person's own home. That was really one of the best things that came from it. So we're pleased with our relationship and the actions of the regulators, and we hope that continues for many, many years.
I love it, Bill. Bill is one of my favorite people to have a conversation with. You get great information, a lot of useful information, and Bill is funny. He's got a great sense of humor. So if you're enjoying this conversation, please like and share the video. And be sure to subscribe to join us in future conversations on how business can be a force for good. So Bill, let's switch gears a little bit and talk about telehealth. And I know with COVID, telehealth has also been a big issue. We know telehealth has played an important role during the pandemic, but it hasn't historically been honored by federal regulators. And we've been talking about some regulatory policies changing. So they haven't focused on it as much as they focused on in-person visits. So tell us from your vantage point again about the role that you see telehealth playing in the future.
Well, we first see telehealth not as a service, but as a tool for the healthcare professionals to use. But some tools are more valuable than others, and telehealth is a really valuable tool. We see the demographics where the demand for care is going to grow. We don't necessarily see the workforce correspondingly growing. So what kind of tools will be available to supplement those professionals and the home care aides going into the home? And that is a telehealth service to allow a nurse extension by having to avoid the drive back and forth. We do not want to see in-person care go away in a home setting, but we have to recognize that there are tools that can really help it. Now, telehealth came into the world of home care 2 decades ago. It just didn't take off. There were issues, including, what your hardware was. People would sit down with a big laptop between themselves and the patient. That was not going to work. With smartphones, that small piece of equipment allowed people to have that eye-to-eye contact rather than the front of the screen and the back of the screen kind of content. The telehealth also advanced in terms of what it can do. I mean, we have skilled wound care happening through telehealth. That doesn't mean it's changing the dressing, but you've got a family member being shown how to change the dressing with a high resolution camera examining the wound to determine whether or not infection is set in and so on. We've got high levels of education and training of people for self-care. We have therapy services, reteaching people how to walk using a two-way video telecommunications approach to it. So I don't know what the end in sight is for telehealth. I actually think the next step will be robotics. And I really, truly don't believe that's maybe not going to happen in my aged lifetime, but it will happen in the not too distant future. So I think home care was right in the beginning to go from pure high touch to high touch and high tech. And I think it will absolutely be very, very smart for anybody in the stakeholder community, and that includes the technology people, continue to invest in telehealth services in the home setting. It's remarkable what I've seen done with telehealth. And if anybody who's listening to this, wants to experience that, we probably, either you or I, can probably arrange for them to have some three-dimensional view of what that might be, or maybe just a two-dimensional view. Let's let them see what can happen in a two-way video thing. But some of the amazing things is 24/7 monitoring of almost every sign on the patient. And I remember, this was quite a while ago, maybe some people won't remember this, but when Senator John Glenn took his second trip into orbit of the Earth, and he went up there in the space shuttle. He was much older at that point in time, and he was an example of a telehealth patient. They gave him a suppository that monitored every sign that he had going on. And now, without using suppositories, we do that in the home setting 24/7 all across the country and spreading across the world. Remarkable advances.
I love the example you gave because that's really insightful. It's funny, I had never thought about it in that setting. So you're making the case like, hey, that was telehealth, and you're exactly right. But I'm glad we can do it now, and it doesn't cost as much as it must have cost to make sure that happened for Senator Glenn, for sure.
Yep. You can do it just like we're doing it right now, through a Zoom presentation or Facebook. We have some privacy issues that have to be worked out there for, people's healthcare privacy, but it doesn't take NASA to get us there in telehealth anymore.
I love it. So Bill, you and I have this in common. We believe strongly that the future of healthcare is in the home. So let's spend some time talking about the value of care in the home. We have an audience that may not understand it as intimately as you and I do. So talk about the value of care in the home in the general sense and why everyone listening should care about it from a quality perspective, from a cost perspective, from just an efficiencies perspective, and talk about opportunities you see for how this can help to be more widely accepted as the preferred care setting. So just set the stage and context for that.
Well, let's start with where many people do start, but I don't think where they should end up, and that's cost. And it has been demonstrated time and time again that care in the home is more cost effective than care in an institutional setting for a broad array of the population. All across the country, state Medicaid programs have rebalanced their spending for long-term care and services into care in the home. It took Americans with Disabilities Act, it took the US Supreme Court, and then it took a lot of concerted effort to get there. But in 2015, for the first time, the Medicaid program spent more in the home for long-term care and service supports than they did in nursing homes. Now, the more important statistic is there's 4 times as many people getting it in home than getting in a nursing home for similar amounts of money. So just think of that. For 1/4 of the price, you're caring for 4 times as many people. That has moved into even higher levels of care now. And the hospital at home program, another example of cost effectiveness. Skilled nursing facility care, $18,000 for 30 days worth of care. Whereas in the home care setting, the typical spend is between $2,000 and $3,000 for not too dissimilar a level of service. So cost effectiveness shouldn't even be a conversation with any disagreement at that point. From the personal preference side, you mentioned it yourself, but personal preferences may sound like, oh, who cares what you want? Well, what you want matters.
Yep.
It matters in terms of your clinical outcomes, for that matter. If you've got buy-in and if you've got optimism in being in the home setting, you're going to have good results coming in the home setting. In terms of value, there's two ways: the dollar value and the clinical value. The dollar value is dynamic. Among other things, it avoids hospitalizations of patients, which brings about tremendous savings. Recent study in this COVID period of time, looking at patients who left the hospital and went home still infected with COVID-19, their rehospitalization rates were minuscule at that point. But generally speaking, they've been tracking rehospitalizations in home care services for a number of years, and we are really looking at a high potency value coming and just keep going back there. That has a cost element to it, but in all honesty, there's a risk element to it as well. Not that hospitals are going to mistreat you, but anytime you go into a hospital, there are risks that go along with it. But beyond that, in terms of the value, it keeps families together. Clinical outcomes, people live longer, functionally better off as well. They regain function or they maintain function even with chronic illnesses. I mean, it meets all of the three aims that they talk about when looking at where healthcare innovation should go.
Love it. Bill, I like how you set the stage and really explained it so that folks that are not in the healthcare industry or the home care industry can really understand how this works. Now, we know that the healthcare industry is a very regulated industry, and you've had long experience in legislative and regulatory efforts involving healthcare overall. And all the possibilities of care in the home or healthcare overall, the regulatory guidelines and in some cases, challenges and opportunities. So what might we see over the next year in terms of new legislation or regulation? And what impact might these challenges have on providers, on businesses, on families, on all of us in general?
Regulation serves a valuable purpose. It can also get in the way. On the value side, what we would expect to see regulatory-wise is a strengthening of regulation and oversight of regulation on quality of care. Infection control stood out in the pandemic period of time. We think home care has done a really solid job on that, but we would be disappointed if the government let down its guard on quality of care. It's so important. And that kind of oversight and that kind of regulation, some people may say, oh, it costs so much money. I think it returns a lot in that term. Now, there's bad regulation as well, and particularly where that happens where they think they put everybody into the same batch. We would have to admit there has been some fraud in healthcare. There's been some fraud in home healthcare and hospice too. We think it's that one bad apple in a barrel kind of comparison, but they end up coming up with regulation that applies to everybody equally. It's not targeted, and a lot of costs being spent shuffling paper, electronic paper, but still shuffling paper. We can understand how difficult it is to figure out who the bad guys are before they're standing in front of you waving a flag saying arrest me. But at the same time, there needs to be a balance there on how much of that regulation is really needed. Can they use various new tools that are out there that can spot a fraudulent provider of services from a further distance away? And they are now creating artificial intelligence algorithms to be able to do that. So we hope that they'll be a little more precise. So, we see the positives and we see the negatives on regulation. When I first became a lawyer, John, there were no good regulations. That was my knee-jerk reaction to it. As it turns out, maybe I've matured a little bit. Maybe I've gotten old, I don't know. But there are some of those good regulation. And we think that home care pretty much has embraced it. There's a sector of care in the home now, which is not Medicare, home health, or hospice services, that is seeing the value of that regulation in terms of setting consistent standards for quality of care and patient outcomes as personal care services, regulated by the states more than it is by the federal government. But we're seeing people willing to accept accreditation for quality operation standards or even state licensure on that, because they want the public to know that there are these supports for quality of care out there. at the same time, yeah, we don't want to see these guys with guns and badges knocking down doors, and inside the building is somebody who's doing everything right.
Got it. You know, Bill, it's important that regulators understand the industry and are making policies that really help increase access to quality care, as you mentioned. So can you just touch briefly on efforts, the industry efforts to partner with regulators and help them understand the value of care in the home so they can make better policies?
Well, you know, we're partnering with them on the development of a program called the Home Health Value-Based Purchasing Program, for example, where value is not a dollar and cents one, it is a patient outcome approach, which then has dollar and cents impact. You know, a patient outcome, as I mentioned earlier, not going into a rehospitalization, value financially, value clinically, value for that person overall. We're working with them on other innovative programs that will provide that care in the home setting as an alternative to an institutional care program. We've devised something we call Choose Home, which is to create an alternative to the Medicare skilled nursing facility benefit in a facility, creating that same level of option in the home setting as well. So we also have taken a pretty strong stance on that program integrity measure that I went before. We have given them at the federal government a list of action steps that we think they can take that are effective as well as efficient, that are not the shotgun approach that goes after everybody, that recognizes that, yeah, a gun and a badge may be necessary sometime, but educational support and clear guidance is another way to get compliance as well. You know, with the other thing we're doing, John, is, you know, and this is in your world, we're telling them how they can use technology to do the same work. You know, whether it's the electronic visit verification in order to make sure there's time and attendance of care, or there's documentation that is of a language and available to everybody very quickly, you know, through the electronic health records and the like. So that's the role. We do see ourselves as a partner with them.
I love it. You know, whenever you have someone like Bill Dombi as a guest, it's just a fascinating conversation. So if you're enjoying this conversation, again, please like and share the video, and be sure to subscribe. Join us in future conversations on how business can be a force for good. You know, Bill, I'm usually the one that's being asked about technology to talk about it. I know you touched on it a little bit and you did not go deeper. So I want you to go deeper and expound on your thoughts some. So share additional thoughts on the importance of technology in home care and the role it can play, just as broad as you want to take it, to enable better access to care.
Yeah, well, I'm going to assume some people listening might be uninitiated in the depth of home care. I'll take you on a quick visit by a home health agency.
Let's do it.
The nurses left her home, having reviewed the entire chart of the individual before she left her home to go to the patient's home, because it's all electronic. It is up to the moment in terms of depth, comprehensiveness, and accuracy. She goes to the home and she has her telehealth aspects with her, but she's doing point of care planning, instantaneous connection with physicians' offices to update that physician on what she's seen with the patient, get change orders, which transmit automatically to the office of the home health agency, where it gets into the overall record of the patient, even ties into the billing systems, and ties into what's known as the patient outcome analysis, the quality of care analysis. An OASIS assessment is the acronym used for that. And then the next day into the home comes a therapist who has all of that same information that came about from the day before, and can follow up on the same routine as well. So you've got that ability on a remote basis to be in touch with the patient, in touch with the physician's office, in touch with your own home office, accessing your own records, accessing records that came from the hospital, lab tests and x-ray test results and the like, and be able to then be fully informed instead of starting from ground zero every time you go into the home. Obviously, you're going to get much better clinical action for that patient that way. But beyond that, given that it's electronic, I'll take you back to the old ages when if you showed up in the first 8 hours of the day, you used a green pen. If you were there in the next 8 hours a day, you used a black pen. And in the last 8 hours, you were using a red pen. And then You would put it on your copy machine so somebody else could read it, not knowing that green didn't go through on the copies. So you would miss 8 hours of service. Look what technology has done, in that short period of time. It's just absolutely amazing on that aspect of it. But then you leave the home, okay, and technology's been left behind. Sophisticated fall monitors, but even more so, there is the Microsoft Home of the Future is not in the future anymore. It exists today, where they will have sensors in the refrigerator to make sure that dinner that was left for the individual is actually moved. They will have the ability for the person to step on a scale and instantly send a weight to the individual so they could follow some of those kinds of things. So this is like the science fiction of, that we read about when we were kids. It's in the healthcare realm. It's happening today.
Yeah, I am so excited about this. And again, as I said earlier, I'm usually the one doing all the explaining and answering all those questions. You've done a much better job than I could ever do explaining that. So I didn't have you close by, or just make sure I can dial you quickly, and maybe even tape and record your comments so I can take that with me and share that with everyone. I like how you explain it and just make the case in a very simple to understand manner. So thank you for doing my job for me, Bill. I appreciate it. Okay, so let's wrap this up. I want you to share your perspective on what you think is the most important thing that you want our viewers to know about home care and the good it plays in our world. Just keep it simple, short and sweet for them. What should be the most important takeaway?
12 million people getting care when they want it, where they want it, how they want it, with good, solid clinical outcomes. I'll add one little sub note to that. It is a great place to work. And as we see, this population aging, the so-called silver tsunami, we need really talented people to come into this place. It will be a rewarding position for you, whether you be a nurse, a home care aide, an executive, an administrator. I mean, look at the smiles you see out of John's face. He knows that it is a great place to be around, where you can do some good. So the thing more than anything else is, it is the place where people want to be, getting the care when they want it, how they want it, and getting it in an effective way. So it's been my privilege to have an opportunity to work, to help get home care. I know I can't be a home care direct care provider. I've tried it with family members. I'm terrible at it. It's hard work, but it's extraordinarily rewarding.
Well, if I wanted care, I wouldn't want it from you, So, but I'm glad you made the case for how it's noble work for sure, and I'm glad you made comments about how technology really empowers to make it even a lot easier. So thank you for joining us today. Thank you for your time and for all the amazing work that you're doing to advance quality healthcare in the home. For all, thank you.
You're very welcome. And John, thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for the great work that you do as well all across this country for those people in need of home care.